Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're breaking down the true, spoiler-filled meaning behind the ending of Dune. Now, if you finished Frank Herbert's masterpiece, or if you just walked out of Denis Villeneuve's incredible cinematic adaptation, you are probably left with a bit of a lingering sense of unease, right? It doesn't quite feel like a standard happy ending. So let's look past the surface-level plot to uncover what Herbert really intended and why this epic story concludes the exact way it does.
We're going to anchor this entire breakdown on Frank Herbert's core thesis. Listen to this quote spoken by the planetary ecologist Leet Kynes in the book. It's literally the master key to unlocking Dune's ending. What feels like this triumphant, fist-pumping moment, a young man avenging his father and winning back his stolen kingdom, is actually the jaws of a devastating trap snapping shut. Herbert intentionally subverted the traditional hero's journey to warn us that charismatic leaders who demand unquestioned loyalty inevitably bring catastrophe.
To really grasp this, we're going to deconstruct our anti-hero's ascent across 5 key areas: the illusion of victory, weaponizing the Messiah myth, love, politics and betrayal, the prison of prescience, and finally, the cost of absolute power. Let's get into it.
Starting off with Section 1, the illusion of victory and Paul's real conquest.
Okay, so let's look at the physical mechanics of Paul's triumph. The climax of the story features that tense, breathless knife duel between Paul and Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen. In the text, this is invoked as Conley, a sacred ritual of mortal combat to end a blood feud. But Denis Villeneuve makes this brilliant little adjustment on screen. He uses this duel to canonize Paul's victory over the Emperor himself, with Feyd acting as the Emperor's champion. But here's the thing, Paul's real victory wasn't actually won with a blade.
Just look at the geopolitical leverage mapped out here. Paul doesn't just win a fistfight. He literally puts a knife to the throat of the entire universe. Sure, he captures the Emperor, but his true targets are the Spacing Guild and the economic powerhouse, CHOAM. By discovering how to permanently destroy the spice using the Water of Life, Paul threatens to ground all interstellar travel forever. Think about that. Without spice, guild navigators are blind. The economy completely collapses, and the great houses are isolated. He basically achieves a total monopoly.
If you peel back the layers of this so-called emancipation, Paul actually operates as a hidden imperialist. Much like the Harkonnens before him, he views the spice, and honestly the Fremen people, as resources to be monopolized and controlled. The oppression is just heavily masked as liberation. He conquers the planet from within, exploiting the very people who follow him.
Which brings us to Section 2, weaponizing the Messiah myth and the Lisan al-Gaib.
So if Paul was just one displaced heir in the desert, how did he rally an army of fierce warriors to pull this off? The answer is the Missionaria Protectiva. This was a centuries-long Bene Gesserit program designed to plant religious superstitions among vulnerable populations. The prophecy of the Lisan al-Gaib wasn't some divine, undeniable truth. It was a fabricated safety net. When Jessica and Paul are taken in, Jessica deliberately decodes these latent beliefs using trigger words like maker to manufacture their Fremen's awe. They didn't fulfill a prophecy, they hijacked a pre-packaged religion.
And Paul doesn't just stumble blindly into this religious warfare. In the film, when Paul decides to go south and drink the water of life, Gurney Halleck warns him of the sheer horror that path will bring. Paul's response is absolutely chilling, because I gain it. He knows exactly what he's doing. He actively chooses to weaponize faith for absolute power, shedding the idealistic youth who feared this holy war to become a ruthless pragmatist.
As he steps into the role of the Messiah, Paul essentially strips the Fremen of their individuality. Herbert writes about how the fierce Fremen leader Stilgar transforms from a proud, independent chieftain into a mere receptacle for awe and obedience. It's such a tragic lessoning of the man. By playing the living God, Paul reduces a vibrant, complex culture into passive instruments of his own political agenda.
And this calculated grab for power brings us to Section 3, love, politics, and betrayal, and the price of empire. Notice the stark contrast here between the book and Denis Villeneuve's cinematic interpretation. In the source material, Chani sadly accepts her fate as a concubine, with Lady Jessica comforting her that history will remember them as true wives. Furthermore, the book features Paul's toddler sister, Alia, acting as this terrifying, hyper-aware assassin who actually kills the Baron. The movie streamlines Alia's role and shifts the emotional weight heavily onto Chani. Cinematic Chani recognizes the religious manipulation right away. She refuses to bow, calls a sandworm, and walks away in sheer defiance.
This heartbreak happens because Paul demands the hand of Princess Irulan, the Emperor's daughter.
Let's be clear, this is purely a loveless, calculated political move. By taking her as a hostage wife, he checkmates the Emperor, unites the Atreides and Harkonnen bloodlines, and legally legitimizes his rule over the hesitant great houses. Paul promises Chani he will love her as long as he breathes, but his actions prove he has forfeited personal love for imperial duty.
Moving on to Section 4, the Prison of Prescience and the Oracular Trap.
Paul is the culmination of a centuries-long genetic breeding program. He is the Kwisatz Haderach, gifted with prescience, the ability to see across time and space. You'd think seeing the future is a superpower, right? Wrong. When you take a life, you take your own. His ability to see the future is exactly what traps him. Once he steps onto the path of the Messiah, he becomes locked into a cosmic script he absolutely cannot escape.
To put it bluntly, Paul's life ceases to be about making choices. Because he can see the terrifying outcomes of every possible decision, he is merely reenacting the future that results in the least amount of total devastation. He is forced to walk a timeline defined as the safest available catastrophe.
This is the ultimate oracular trap. He's painfully aware that stepping into this messianic role triggers a galactic slaughter, yet his visions prove that all alternative paths lead to his total destruction or even worse fates for humanity. He even foresees that this path will lead to Chani's eventual death, which is a massive tragedy exploited in Dune Messiah. He basically becomes the unwilling center of a fanatic faith that no longer even needs his permission to burn the universe in his name.
And that brings us to our final section, the cost of absolute power and the tragic fallout.
60 billion. Just let that number sink in for a second. That is the unimaginable number of lives that will be claimed by the Fremen jihad unleashed in Paul's name across the galaxy. Because the great houses refuse to accept his ascendancy, the holy war he dreaded becomes a horrifying, unstoppable reality. The hollow nature of his triumph is quantified entirely by this massive, staggering death toll.
You see, personal sincerity cannot cleanse political consequence. Paul may have genuinely mourned his father and loved Chani, but the fallout is catastrophic. Planetary systems are completely shattered. An entrenched religious bureaucracy takes over. Ultimately, Paul Atreides avenges his family only to become the very thing he fought against, a brutal dictator commanding a terrifying imperial death machine.
This is exactly why Frank Herbert subverts the traditional hero's journey so aggressively. He argued that power itself attracts the corruptible. By presenting Paul as a traditional savior who ultimately brings about a genocide, Herbert is begging us not to hand over our critical faculties to people in power, no matter how admirable or charismatic they might seem on the surface. He who can destroy a thing can control a thing. By controlling the spice on Arrakis, Paul Atreides wins the ultimate geopolitical game. But in securing the physical universe, he loses absolutely everything that tethered him to his own humanity.
And that leaves us with this final, haunting question. Did Paul Atreides actually conquer the universe, or did he just become its ultimate prisoner? This grim conclusion perfectly sets the stage for the deep tragedies of the sequel, Dune Messiah, leaving us to wonder if the most powerful man in the universe ever really had any free will at all. Keep questioning your heroes, and thanks for joining me for this explainer.